These are my fire-bellied toads. I got these goofy little frogs a couple months ago and set them up in this temporary enclosure. This has been working fine for them, but I knew I could make something better. So in this video I'll show you how I built them a custom tank from scratch that mimics a lush forest aesthetic and even includes a waterfall. And just like any other project, it all starts with a tank. And for this one I decided to build a custom tank. To get the glass, I disassembled an old tank and used scraps from previous projects. Once cleaned and cut to size, I siliconed the first batch of pieces together and left them to dry for 24 hours. The next day I wanted to address filtration before adding the final piece of glass. I'm going to drill for bulkheads, which is really easy. Using a diamond tipped drill bit will make that possible. Taping a guide to the glass will hold water and prevent the drill bit from overheating. And then I just let the weight of the drill do the work. After drilling, I cut a few more pieces of glass to build an overflow box around the filter's return. The next day I also cut a few pieces to form the top of the tank. However, the glass I had left at this point isn't quite long enough to bridge over the entire length, so I added two narrow pieces on either side of the tank to help support the top pieces. In between the supports and the top, I sandwiched a piece of window screen. Now, I'll admit, I didn't think this part through, and the next day I came back to cured silicone and a sagging window screen. The screen is only attached with a dab of silicone in each corner, so I could try to remove it, add a frame and put it back. But I think I came up with a better solution. I weaved fishing line through the mesh and pulled the line to create tension. I did this all around the screen and then locked it in place with silicone. And once everything cured, the fishing line could be removed. Next I made and stained a wooden frame to go around the front of the tank. This does give the tank a more official look, but it's mainly there so we can attach doors later on. Along with the frame, I also made two little handles for the doors. I drilled into the top of these and epoxied a neodymium magnet in each. I then attached matching magnets in the frame. And while the epoxy cures, I'm going to prepare the glass for the doors. For most of the glass in this project, I didn't care if it was scratched or not, cause you're not gonna see it anyway. But these doors have to be absolutely scratch free. But I didn't have anything in the right size and thickness that was scratch free. And believe it or not, but the cheapest way to get the desired glass was to buy this budget aquarium and take it apart. With the doors taken care of, I began attaching these cork panels to the background. I'll be carving these later, so for now I'm just trying to get the rough shape. The side and back stayed in place on their own, but for the smaller pieces I needed to use toothpicks. Once everything dried, I moved the tank over to the animal room and began making some accurate islands. My vision for this tank includes two islands on either side of the tank, with water between and in front of them. Here you can get an idea of what I'm going for. Okay, so I have a small problem. I do not like the stand at all. I used to have an aquarium in the same spot before and it was fine being so low to the ground, but with the Paludarium in that spot I just really dislike looking down into the tank. So what I want to do is take the tank out of the stand, move the stand over to the shed, take it apart, modify it so that when I sit down I can look straight into the tank. Now would you look at that, it looks so much better in my opinion. It has a way nicer color of stain, it's at a really nice viewing angle. The stand is also just designed better in my opinion. I'm really happy that we made a new stand. We also installed the doors, they have a magnet latch and it's a really strong magnet. You won't open this accidentally, the frogs won't be able to open this stuff. I'm really happy so far. Now, the next step will be carving the background. And for that we're gonna use a knife and these wire brush drill bits. Carving up the background was really easy. I just made sure to ease all the edges and make it look like one cohesive unit. Now besides that, I also just want to go over each surface to rough it all up and make it appear like some sort of muddy wall. After carving, you're left with a bunch of cork shavings. Most of these could be thrown away, but I did make sure to save some for later. With the background carved, we can now move to the islands. These were looking pretty good, but needed to be covered with geotextile fabric to prevent debris from getting stuck within. I added more acrylic to the bottom and made a quick deskscape. I was confident I could make it work with the rocks I had on hand and started using pieces of slate to construct a waterfall. Using scraps of XPS foam allowed me to build up height without adding more weight. At first I was really struggling to get something I liked, but skipping a few stones and building up a rough foundation really helped me visualize what I was trying to create. And once I placed this piece of cork next to the waterfall, it gave me confidence I was on the right track. Smashing up undesirable pieces gave me smaller stones that could be used to bridge the gaps. Once I found something I was happy with, I took it all apart and started locking in the lower pieces with expanding foam. Once these stabilized, I continued working up towards the overflow box. But the top half proved to be more challenging. Not only does it need to continue upwards in the natural pattern, but it also needs to connect to a specific point. Needless to say, this took a while. The waterfall is looking really good. I'm really happy with what we came up with. But if we turn it on right now, then the water will most likely all flow over this edge over here and not really follow the structure that well. So we need to make some sort of border around this edge here to make sure it will flow down the intended path. Now for that I have this really cool cork branch. It's a really long piece. Now I really like this piece because it has a lot of corners down here over on this edge, which coincidentally seem to be lining up really well with the waterfall we made. So we can go ahead and make something like this that follows it, or the other way around, like this it may follow, but you can already notice it's way too long to fit in there, so we'll need to cut it down a bit to start figuring out how we can use this. And after cutting the branch to size, it fit perfectly. So I locked it and some stones on the other side in place with more expanding foam. Next I also continued the branch with a small offcut and hit the remaining bit of glass on the overflow box with more expanding foam. I let all of this dry for roughly 20 minutes and then went back to press all the expanded portions back down to avoid carving later on. Once the foam was fully dry, I applied super glue over the foam and covered it with the cork shavings from earlier. After that I brushed away the excess to reveal a cohesive looking waterfall. But the real question is, how does it look with water? Now that's working beautifully. I've never made a water feature like this, so I couldn't be happier with the result. It looks amazing. But although it looks really well, it is leaking in a few spots. This isn't really a problem and I honestly expected this to happen. I made sure to design the islands to handle being constantly wet. But before we get into that, I continued working on the hardscape. The waterfall turned out a bit bigger than I had planned, so I made a little extension for the island. After that, I began placing in the rocks. I made sure to test out a few different layouts. Some of the rocks weren't quite tall enough, so I elevated them using scraps of XPS foam. Once I was mostly happy with the design, I began working on the base of the waterfall. I originally planned for this to just be a drop-off and have no slate in the water portion. But after seeing the slate continue in the water, I knew I had to keep it. But not like this. It's just a bit too dominant and takes up too much of the water. I rebuilt the base but made it way steeper and hollowed out the back to give the fish a bit more swimming space. I then locked everything in place with more expanding foam and left it to cure overnight. The next day I carved away as much of the foam as possible and also used super glue and a paper towel to glue two branches together. And hit everything with more cork shavings. At this point the hardscape is finished and we can fill the tank back up with water. This revealed a bunch of loose cork shavings that I had to net out before we could continue. With everything now clean, I added one of my stickers on the filter, after which I could turn it back on. With the waterfall running, I'm going to design the water area. I first added some aqua soil and then capped it with a thick layer of sand. I did rinse the sand before use, but it still made the water very cloudy, so I did a little water change to make sure I could see what I was doing. I think the contrast between the stones and the sand is a bit too harsh, so I used some smaller rocks, small bits of slate and some black gravel to create a more natural transition. After that, I moved back up out of the water and started adding a bunch of rehydrated sphagnum moss. This stuff shouldn't have a problem being in constant contact with water and will actually help wick water up for the plants and moss.
Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that is a really cool shirt. I wish I could have such a cool shirt. Well, you're in luck, because I recently decided to open up a merchandise store where you can buy shirts, stickers, mugs and a lot more. I put a lot of love and effort into the designs, making sure they're not just commercials for the channel, but something that you would actually want to wear. For example, this shirt includes a fire-bellied toad and a zebra danio, the two animals that I plan on putting in this tank. So if you would like to support the channel and get a really cool shirt in return, the link is in the description. Now let's get on with the video.
It's time to add the plants and I'm starting off underwater. I'm not going too crazy here and will keep it light with only a few Cryptocorini and some dwarf Sagittaria. I also think a tank like this demands floating plants. I decided to go for some Amazon frogbit. Next I began adding plants to the land area. I began on the right island with some Opiopogon and some Syngonium. And then began working my way to the left with some ferns. On the left island I had to play around a bit more with the plants, but it didn't take too long before I found something I'm happy with. Back on the right island I also added this Hemigraphis and then began adding some vine plants throughout the tank. And with all the plants now in place,
It's time to add moss.
I used various species of moss to cover the remaining bits of sphagnum moss. This helped to tie everything together and make the tank appear more natural. Adding botanicals will add to this as well. I sprinkled a variety of leaf litter, seed pods and sticks all over the tank. And in my opinion these details are what take this tank to the next level. With that, the scaping is done and it's time to start adding the inhabitants. I first rounded up some bladder snails and added them into the tank. Next up were the zebra danios. Once released, they started darting around the tank right away and added a ton of life. But the real stars of this tank are obviously the frogs. A couple days later I also added some Amano shrimp, yellow sakura shrimp and springtails. And there it is, the new and improved fire-bellied toad Paludarium. I've been planning this for a while and I'm really happy to finally see it completed. It was a really fun build and it feels good to provide these frogs with a better home. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments. And if you're hungry for more frog content, I recommend you watch this video next to see me raise a group of tadpoles. I'll see you there.